I got commissioned to build this storm door. The client could have went and got one of those aluminum storm doors, but it would have really destroyed the look of this house. As you can see, it's entirely unique. It's one of the coolest additions I think I've ever seen. It reminds me of something that Ron Weasley would live in from the Harry Potter films. And so anyways, I needed to make something that was at least fit the area. And so this is what we came up with. The whole door is made from Spanish cedar, a wood that has great moisture resistant properties, things that we need in southern Louisiana, where it's constantly humid and warm. Now, I don't have a joiner, and it was absolutely essential that I have nice flat and squared lumber from the beginning. And so I made this sled that will essentially turn my planer into a joiner. And so I basically just use hot glue, secure it to the sled, and then I come back around and shim the areas that are not touching the sled so that the planer doesn't just push this piece of wood down to the sled, and then it would defeat the whole purpose here. Now I noticed that my glue gun's called Thermo Grip. Not a very good name for a hot glue gun because you really don't want the heat on your hand. Like my children burn themselves on that thing. Thermo Grip's just not the right word. Maybe thermo tip sounds a little bit better. So after you get the board all secured to the sled, you can just send it right on through the planer. But that sled's extremely heavy. I made it out of MDF and I kind of regret it, but I wanted something that'd be nice and flat. And MDF is typically nice and flat. So after I put it through, you gotta pop it off. And that's it. You can see nice and flat. The sled does an excellent job. And it's a whole lot cheaper than a $1,600 planer. But then again, you gotta do what you gotta do. So after I got all the boards flattened, I put them all through the planer and get them to my desired thickness, which was right at about 1 inch. And so of course I started with 5/4 rough sawn lumber. That's my shop dog. But he was getting just covered in sawdust, so I told him to sit and stay right there. He listens pretty good, but I thought it'd be interesting to time him and see how long he would just stay there, because I really quit paying attention to him at that point. And he only stayed there for about a minute. But you can see everything's nice and flat, playing to the correct thickness, but there's a bow in it. And so I need to get a straight edge ripped on it, and of course I don't have a joiner, and so I just use this little edge guide and I screw it to the face. I screw it to the face of my piece of wood and I send it through the table saw, and that straight edge references off my table saw guide, or the guardrail or fence, that's what you call it. My goodness. It references off the fence and it puts a straight edge on the board. You see I'm not taking off that much. I just want to take off just enough to get a nice straight edge all the way across. So this is my drawing. This is what I'm aiming at. It's a rough sketch. I got my measurements and whatever. It's nice to keep that in mind as you're laying out your parts. And so here's all my parts. They're all labeled. I need to keep track of it. It's essential at the early steps of this build. So I just cut everything off to the approximate lengths that I need. Don't have to be precise here. Don't have to be square. I just need to get the boards down to a manageable length. I use chalk because it comes off super easy, and I don't want to leave dents in the wood, and I don't want to leave stains inside the wood, and so chalk works pretty good. And so again, I'm not ripping these down to their final length, I'm just getting them close. So here I'm resawing the panel boards that make up the bottom panel. They only needed to be about 1/2 of an inch thick, and so I can get that much out of the board if I just resaw it right in half. So that's what I did. It worked great, and that Laguna bandsaw is completely awesome. This is my first time using it for the resaw capabilities, and it was a great saw. So I'm planning them down to their final thickness, which was 1/2 of an inch. Ripping them down to their width. And so here is the panel parts. Now I'm going to do a tongue and groove to help reinforce this panel. I could have used a biscuit, but why do that? A tongue and groove is going to give it consistent strength from top to bottom of each joint. And so that's what I did. And you can see there is the groove, and I'm ripping the tongue on it right now. And here they are. They fit together nice and tight, and yet smooth. I have some room in there for my glue. Now, even though this was going to be painted, I wanted to keep all the wood oriented right and keep that book match finish. It just looked nice. There was really no reason for it, but why not make it look nice? So I'm checking for flatness. I don't want this panel to be bowed. It would have really caused me some trouble later on, and so I'm just checking to make sure it's nice and flat. I'm not checking to see if it's level. And so now I'm starting to put my dado through the rails and the stiles, whatever you would call it, of this door. But I needed to fit in a piece of glass, and I needed to fit in this panel. And so everything gets a dado. And I'm putting a 1/2 inch dado in there, which should be obvious since my panel's a 1/2 inch. So those feather boards are great. You don't want to get any movement as you're putting this big long dado through this piece. It's really going to screw up the job later on when you're trying to assemble all your parts. So the dado's got to be perfectly centered and perfectly straight with the board. And so the feather boards do a really good job keeping the piece fixed against the fence. So I'm cutting everything to length here with the crosscut sled. And so yes, I did just drop my tape measure down into the garbage can. And I had to fish it out and I couldn't reach. And so I got to pull the garbage out, reach down in there. And now it's time to cut it again. So if I was making several of these long pieces, I would have made some kind of a stop system where I could just repeat the cut over and over again rather than cutting to a pencil mark. But I only did 2 and I can be pretty accurate, so that's what I did. Now here I'm laying out for my mortises. For each of the horizontal pieces are mortised into the vertical pieces. Absolutely essential for strength. And so I use a router with an upcut spiral bit. And then I made that fancy base for my router, inspired by that samurai carpenter. And it's actually a really great addition to your router. You can put those guards on the plexiglass base, and that way you can make your mortises without much thought. You don't go too far to either side. Now, I didn't have a thick piece of plexiglass to make that base. I wish that I did, because it's a little bit floppy when you're trying to do like a tenon or something with your router. And so I don't do tenons with my router. I'll use my bandsaw and a table saw and a dado, which you'll see it soon enough. And so I'm cleaning out the mortises with my chisels. I just want to get them nice and square. I don't want the round edges from the router, and I don't want any little shards of wood or anything that may have been left in there. So I'm cleaning them out. Squaring up the ends with a 1/2 inch chisel. And there they all are. Perfectly placed and identical. And so now it's time to cut the tenons. And then I finish them up with the bandsaw, which is amazingly accurate. Yeah, that Laguna bandsaw is one of the best tools that I've purchased yet. My next one will be a joiner. So I'm now just checking to see if it all fits nice and tight. And that fits exactly how I want, and it's nice and flush. So now I'm back working on that panel, and I thought maybe I'll just sand it down and see if I can get it nice and flat with the sander. And I realized it might be a little easier to use a hand plane, and so I just want to make sure this is perfectly flat. I don't want somebody to be able to look at it from the side, this panel, and see any kind of waves as the pieces join together. It would have been unacceptable. And so I'm using this hand plane just to go across everything to bring everything down to the same elevation, or to flatten it. And so you can see the valleys where the plane's not shaving any wood off of, and those are the low spots. And so I want to try to get rid of those. And slowly but surely they're disappearing. And then now I can sand it down, get it all nice and smooth. This is going to be the time to do it. I'm not going to have a chance after the panel's assembled and put in the door. So I think I sanded this down to 220, and I didn't have dust collection hooked up to the sander because I don't have, at the time, I didn't have a hose small enough to go into that dust port. So I'm cutting this to final dimensions, and now it's time for the glue up. So it was absolutely essential that I get all the parts glued together well. I used Titebond 3, the exterior grade wood glue, because this is a storm door. It's going to be outside, and it's going to be exposed to the moisture and to the elements. And I don't want to get called back because a joint failed. And so we'll use high-grade glue, and we will make sure that we don't go skimpy on the glue. I would rather clean squeeze out than to rebuild a door. And I just realized that I'm balding on the top. Everyone's been telling me that I've been balding, but I haven't taken their word for it. But looks like the world has not been lying to me. What a shock. Now the glue's all set, all dry, and so I'm sanding everything down to 220. Putting a round over around all the ends. And now I'm installing the piece of tempered glass. Now I didn't record putting that rabbet all the way around, But I basically just took off one side of the dado. Nothing all that impressive. And so I had a piece of tempered glass cut. I've seen a lot of guys build their pieces around their glass or around their mirror, but I built my door and then ordered the glass to fit, and since I paid somebody to cut it, if it doesn't fit, then they'll just have to cut it again. So I'm cutting little rips of wood to hold the piece of glass in place. And since the whole door has this shaker look, I didn't put any fancy detail or anything in these little strips. They're just squared. So I have my micro pin nailer and I'm tacking this into place. Hopefully they will never break this glass, but if they do, it shouldn't be too much trouble to replace it. I didn't glue these strips in place or anything like that. They're just tacked into place with the micro nailer. Alright, so that is the finished door. I put this last piece in, and that will complete the door. Now, of course, I had to go on site and install the door and take the door to the painter so that he could paint it. But that's it. The door is complete. It took me roughly 40 hours altogether, minus the installation, but it came out great. And the client loved it, and it served all their purposes. And it looks like it blends right in to that addition. It was a fun project, and now it's over.